Hey, everybody. Just giving people a moment to jump on. So, welcome to video one of our four-part series, Impact, Leadership, and Goddess. This series as a whole is a journey about taking you from spiritual disintegration or fracture to legacy level impact. And if you're here with us live, feel free to say hello in the comments. If you're on the replay, feel free to share your comments below. Legacy on the outside. And we'll get into what those things might be that you might be missing on the inside, as well as what it is that you might be seeking on the outside. This is for you if you are a spiritually inclined CEO or founder, executive, teacher, or leader who is also desiring to create a legacy level impact. That's who this is for. Now, what is legacy level impact, right? Because before we dive into all of this, it's really important to name what we're working with here. Legacy level impact is an impact that goes beyond your lifetime, either in the work that you or your organization bring to the collective, or in a ripple down effect through future generations, like your family of origin and your family line. So that's what legacy level impact is. Now, before we talk about the topic that we're talking about today, which is spiritual fracture, spiritual disintegration, I'm going to invite us all to take a moment together to take 3 or 4 deep breaths to ground, to get centered and present into today and today's energy. And feel your body and your breath here with me. Bringing your human self into the room. Bringing your higher self into the room. And reaching out to God, Goddess, the divine, as you know it. So if you're here for this live stream or for this whole series, you've likely been on a really big spiritual journey of your own. And that might be through traditional religion. That might be through work with the divine feminine, the sacred feminine, yoga, meditation, Buddhism, one or more spiritual paths. And you know that you've learned a lot on your journey. You know that you have a tremendous amount to give as a result of the journey that you've been on. But sometimes it's like you don't quite know how to bring out your gifts in the way that you want to. You don't quite know how to bring what you have to give out into the collective. And for some of you, not for all of you, for some of you, there's likely an emotional component to this. That emotional component being either something in the realm of really big mood swings, really big emotions, probably in all directions, and or a fear that if others saw who you truly are, especially in a professional context, if others, within your workplace or in your entrepreneurial sphere saw who you really are, that they would go running out the door screaming and heading to the hills. Both of these situations relate to spiritual fracture. Both of these situations relate to spiritual disintegration. And both of these situations play into the topic of legacy level impact. So let's start to unpack all of this. Okay. What is spiritual integration? Spiritual integration, and I don't have definitions for this, I just have my sense today. Spiritual integration is as you've gone on your own spiritual journey, it's about how you bring your gifts out to the collective. The first aspect of spiritual integration is what gifts have you learned and are you bringing them to the collective? And if so, how? And the second part of spiritual integration is when, gosh, how do I say this? Have you integrated your human self with your higher self? Have you integrated your big emotions, your mood swings, even your childhood traumas, your belief systems, religious wounding, religious trauma? Have you integrated that with who you really are and who you're really meant to be? That's the other side of spiritual integration. So, obviously, the more spiritually integrated you are, the larger impact you can create. The first part is really linear. It's the more you know what your gifts are, the more you can use them to make an impact in the world. And the second aspect is that the more emotionally integrated you are, the better you can lead. So, what then is spiritual disintegration or spiritual fracture, which is the title of this live stream, right? Spiritual disintegration, spiritual fracture, and disconnection from God. Spiritual disintegration or spiritual fracture is when you go down that spiritual path, when you go down that path that you've been on of, religion, Buddhism, meditation, the divine feminine, whatever your path has been. And you either try to bring your learnings to the collective and they don't latch. And I don't mean try once, but try again and again and again. And or there's this deep sense of brokenness or fracture inside your emotional being, possibly just in your emotional being, possibly in the scenario I mentioned earlier, where are afraid that if people really saw you, they would run away screaming, and possibly even in your leadership style or leadership skills. So that's spiritual disintegration, spiritual fracture. So take a moment, breathe into this. This is a lot for 7 minutes, and feel in your body how this is landing. So let's talk about how spiritual fracture and spiritual disintegration show up, especially in terms of leadership, legacy, and impact. We'll start with some signs and symptoms. You might have success, but it's really, really hard won. Like you fought for every ounce of success that you have. There's burnout, your success is hard won, there's fatigue, there's exhaustion. You've literally gotten to where you are through hustling or pushing or forcing and not through grace, not through synchronicity. I'm not saying ease because it's not necessarily easy, but there's been like a lack of grace, a lack of doors opening, right person at the right time. The next symptom of spiritual fracture or spiritual disintegration is fear and shame over who you are. Fear and shame that if your colleagues or team or even those that you lead truly knew you, it would all fall apart. Like you might feel as if you have parts of yourself you have to hide because they're too emotional, too expressive, too irrational, too non logical, too non-linear. So you put them away and you hide them from the collective. And side note, plot twist, you guys, it's actually integrating these parts that helps take you to your next level, the integration of this as part of what you need to get to where you want to go. Another sign or symptom of spiritual fracture is big emotions or big mood swings, despite the spiritual journey, despite, sitting on the mountaintops and talking to the gurus, despite, going to the Dalai Lama, despite going to all the meditation retreats. You either have huge emotional expressions, big mood swings, or the complete opposite of that, a fear of expressing emotions at all. Okay, we have two more on this signs and symptoms of spiritual fracture. You might have had a spiritual journey, but you don't know how to integrate that with your personal identity. And I'm going to say something else about this one. So, we're born with this collective identity, our name and the tribe, who our parents tell us to be, our everyday identity, our human self. Some might call it ego, but our human self. And then at times when you go on a spiritual journey, there's a sense of expansiveness, of you being more than the surface level, of you being more than who you were told. For myself, that's the identity of Ashura Eden, right? But there can also be glitches or hitches or holdups in I integrating that higher spiritual self with the personal identity of you now. And particularly, not just that integration process, and then weaving those separate aspects into your impact and legacy. And the final symptom of spiritual fracture is that you've had a spiritual journey, but you might know what your gifts are, you might not, but you either don't know what your gifts are from that journey, or you do know what your gifts are, but you don't know how to bring them into your leadership. So again, that's a lot too. So take a beat, take a moment, and let that sink in. Let's talk about how the spiritual disintegration might show up specifically for you. Those were the symptoms of spiritual disintegration or spiritual fracture. This is a little bit more specific. It's like you might be this person with these 5 things. So there's a lot of ways that this shows up specifically, but here are two really, really, really specific ones. Scenario 1, you've had a massive spiritual journey and you know that you've gleaned gifts from it, gifts that you would like to use to shift your impact in business or in the world. But no matter how hard you try, this impact isn't happening. You're feeling burnt out, exhausted, stressed out, and frustrated. You might be afraid that you will never make the difference that you are here to make. And especially you might be afraid or concerned that you might never make the impact that you're here to create for those who come after. Okay, that's scenario 1. That's one really concrete way that this can show up. A second really concrete way that this can show up is this. You might be making the impact. You might have the success. You might have, you might be a CEO or at the top of your organization. You might be an entrepreneur at 7 figures. If number 2 is you, it's very likely that you have the success, but you've had a massive spiritual journey, but you still feel shattered or fractured. You're supposed to be there emotionally. You're at the top. You're supposed to be together, right? You're supposed to be there emotionally, but on the inside, you feel like a total mess. You might be having big emotions and huge mood swings, or worse yet, be afraid to show your feelings at all. You're very likely terrified that if colleagues, clients, family, or team members saw you as who you truly are and what you truly feel, they'd run away screaming. You'd lose your whole success and everything would break. Take a beat. See if one or both of those land. So, what are the causes of this? What are the causes of spiritual disintegration? What are the causes of spiritual fracture? The first key cause of spiritual disintegration or spiritual fracture is childhood trauma. And this one isn't just what you think it is. While it does include sexual abuse and physical abuse, it can also be caused by nuanced or even subtle emotional things, emotional neglect in childhood, psychological and emotional abuse in childhood, sexual abuse, physical abuse, sideways comments, the little things that seem innocuous, that comment your teacher said about you in third grade that cut down your sense of self. So, childhood trauma in the abuse category as a whole is absolutely one cause of spiritual disintegration. The second thing here, the second main root cause, because there's secondary causes too. The second main root cause with this is religious trauma and misguided programming, especially from Abrahamic or Judeo Christian religions. And we'll be talking about this more later in the series. But if you look at the religious programming we get as children, if you were raised in Judaism or Christianity, because I'm not, I don't know enough to speak freely about other religions, we have Judaism and the punitive God, God smiting people, harsh rules in church or synagogue or religious school, distortions in Abrahamic religions, Judaism and Christianity, that are actually not aligned with the mystical heart of the teachings. I know for a fact, I'm going to feel into some of these distortions right here. Original sin is a distortion. The premise of being bad is a distortion. God striking down people and smiting them is a distortion. And along with religious trauma and misguided programming, we have cults. If you were involved in a cult at any point, or cult-like aspects that can and do creep into the corners of religion. And what this boils down to is that all types of childhood trauma land in the mind, body, heart, and spirit, and literally break us into parts, feeling shattered or fractured. This one runs really deep and can take months or even years to unwind. So we'll be getting into this a little bit more in week 2, not a ton, but a little bit more in week 2. Okay, so come to week 2 if you want more on this. And of course, as an aside to this, adulthood trauma can show up and repeat childhood wounding and can absolutely contribute. So the secondary causes of spiritual disintegration. Okay. Disintegrative spiritual processes, especially without psychological integration. Misusing ceremonial medications. And I don't mean you shouldn't go on an ayahuasca journey, but that there's a way in which ceremonial journeys, especially with medicines, are meant to be held both by skilled shamans and also with psychological support. So, one of the secondary causes of disintegration or fracture is misusing ceremonial medicines, medicine journeys without psychological support, narcissistic mentors, teachers, and coaches, going to talk therapy alone that ignores the magical end of things. And also aspects of the new age, aspects of the self-help worlds, denial of the body. I don't know if anyone's ever followed a new age teacher that was like, your body isn't real, your body doesn't matter. Your body does matter. And it's like the conduit or the gateway to so much of this integration and to so much of your own teachings and to so much of your own wisdom. So the whole new age self-help thing, I'm not saying it's all bad, but aspects of it can deny the body, deny the psyche, and repress emotions. And that can lead to a whole host of breakdown, a whole host of lack of integration, and a whole host of trouble. Another secondary cause of spiritual disintegration. This is an interesting one because this one happens a lot. trying to bring your spiritual gifts into the world using only part of the equation. So let's say you've had your spiritual journey. Let's say you already have a boatload of success. Let's say you are really looking at this through the lens of how do I make that impact for those that come after me in the collective? But you're trying to do this using only part of the equation. So you might be trying business strategy or marketing alone. You might be trying to hustle your way there while ignoring your body, your spirit, and your emotions. You might be trying spiritual processes without psychological and emotional processes. Or this one's also really common. You might be leaving your body out of the equation and neglecting health, movement, and sleep. So that's a huge secondary cause of spiritual fracture. And the third secondary cause is not knowing your higher self or most whole and healed self and failing to bring that into the equation. Now, I'm going to say something about this that's not the same as what I had in my notes. I think I mentioned God at some point. I know God comes up in the title, God comes up in all of these transmissions. Your higher self is not the same as God. God is God, and your higher self, think of God as the sun or goddess or whatever verbiage you use, as like the sun, and there's like rays off the sun, and your higher self is somewhere along that ray, and your everyday human self is at the end of the ray getting the light. So what's happening here is that a lot of us don't know our higher selves, and we don't bring this into the equation of spiritual integration and impact. So you have your everyday or conditioned human self. Like, this is who my mother told me I was. For me, I was born named Jessica. This is who Jessica is, and so on, right? And your everyday human self is fine. It's like the ego, it's what drives the car. It's not bad, it just has its own role. And then you have your higher self. And that's that aspect of yourself on a spirit level that's connected to God. What I just said about the sun and the rays, that's your higher self. And many of us never fully meet or integrate with our own higher selves, right? And then you're going out there trying to, I'm not going to just say create impact, but create a very, very, very specific kind of impact on your highest timeline. And it's not happening. And maybe you've done the psychological work even. Without this, it's going to be incredibly, incredibly challenging. Okay. Taking a beat, seeing if there's any feedback, any comments here. So, what have some of you tried to do to fix this, which has actually made it worse? There's a lot of ways that and I'm going to put myself in this pile with this. There's a lot of ways that we try to fix this problem and we make it worse. All of us, all of us, human nature. Okay. So, here's some of the things you've likely tried to do that have made it worse. Pushing harder on your spiritual path. If only I meditate more, if only I go to more church, if only I go on another retreat or buy another book or do more yoga. And this neglects the other pieces of the puzzle you need to address. I'll just leave it at that. The second thing that you might have tried that has made it worse, and when I say worse, I don't just mean slows down your path. These things disintegrate you more. They break you apart more. You've gone to a shaman or medicine ceremony or big dick energy mindset coach because they seem to have all the answers. Now, I'm not against shamans or medicine energies or medicine ceremonies, but what happens is that when you do this, it tends to neglect psychological integration and dances around your core wounding at best. So it does not necessarily integrate your psyche, and it can frequently become an avoidance stance. And at the absolute worst end of the spectrum, you wind up with a narcissistic mentor or a narcissistic coach who just reperpetuated your own childhood trauma, and the cycle of disintegration begins again. Okay. Another thing that you might have tried to do to fix spiritual fracture is relying heavily on strategy or leadership coaching. Okay, this one has facets that can work, like the brass tacks of bringing your gifts into the world. However, it neglects your authentic identity. It has nothing to do with your higher self. It also neglects your psyche or the pieces of you that most need integration and healing, aka the parts that got lost along the way. And it's like trying to drive on autopilot without bringing your soul along. That's the issue with trying to spiritually integrate with strategy or leadership coaching alone. Okay. The fourth thing that you've likely tried that has only made this worse is something along the lines of trying to go to therapy or mindset coaching, one or both of these, and reasoning your way through. Like, if I can only figure it out, if I could only reason my way through, if I could only reason my way through, perhaps I'll get there. Okay, this one's not awful in the sense that it's not going to like tremendously hurt you. But we're also speaking to the world of God and spirit here, not ration alone, not reason alone. And what's getting left out of the room and acceptable discourse at the bulk of mainstream therapy sessions? God, spirit, diagnosis. And all of this will actually likely split you off from your higher self and potentially split you off from God because, diagnosis. Because what are you going to get called? Schizophrenic, right? Not that you are that, but you know what I mean. So, how do we fix this? How do we fix all of this? How do we walk a path towards spiritual integration that flows into legacy level impact? This begins with you honoring that you must address your psyche, your spiritual gifts, your connection to God, your connection to your own higher self, as well as your connection to your own physical body for this to occur. I'm going to say that again. How do we fix this? How do we walk a path towards spiritual integration that flows into legacy level impact? This begins by honoring that you must address your psyche, your spiritual gifts, your connection to God, your connection to your own higher self, and your body for this to occur. And I'm going to break these down now. So there are 5 things we must address for spiritual integration to occur. 1, psyche. Addressing your psyche, especially at the level of early childhood trauma and core wounds, and integrating all your lost parts on that level. This includes childhood traumas. This includes religious traumas. This includes some, but not necessarily all, adult traumas. This includes clearing those out on a bodily based or somatic level. This includes working with belief systems. This also includes your leadership style and communication patterns, which is also connected to your belief systems and how you are wired. Okay. Number 2, spiritual gifts. Clarifying what spiritual gifts you have gleaned from your spiritual journey and how you are most meant to bring them out in your world. This includes your specific gifts, the ones that are yours to give. This also includes to how you are meant to use these in business, leadership, or within your organization or team. So it's not just what your spiritual gifts are, it's a question of how you're meant to bring them out in business, how you're meant to bring them out in leadership, and how you're meant to bring them out within your organization or the world at large. For some of you, not for all of you, for some of you, it's going to be about how your gifts apply to your impact on your family system, because they can be used to create a lineage within your family. They can be used to create a legacy within your family as well. 3, connection to God. This includes both working on the level of connecting to God slash goddess. And I'm not saying source for a specific reason. If you're believing to source, more power for you to you. But the energy of God or even goddess is very different than saying source. So connection to God, working on the level of reconnecting to God, as well as your higher self and highest timelines, which are all intimately connected to God. So this includes things like more personal level energetic healing. The psyche level is emotional and somatic. This is more of an energetic healing. It can include aspects of soul retrieval, your personal spirituality, your personal connection to God. And I'm going to jump to number 5 for a moment here. We'll go back to number 4. Number 5 is higher self. And I'm bringing up number 5 over here because we have connection to God. God is the sun. There's the rays off the sun. And if you use goddess, that's fine too. Goddess is the sun. Like imagine God is like the sun or the moon, sunlight, moonlight. You could do the feminine thing. That works too. The sun or the moon with the rays of sunlight or moonlight coming off. Your higher self is like a stopping point on that ray of sunlight or moonlight. Okay. So 3 is connection to God or goddess. We'll get back to 4. Number 5 is connecting to your higher self. Higher self being the aspect of yourself that is closer to God. This is different than spiritual gifts. Spiritual gifts are something like clairvoyance. Higher self is the higher level aspect of who you be. So, for myself, like one of my spiritual gifts is intuition. How I'm meant to bring it out into the world is, business oracle activation readings. My higher self is Ashura Eden. You got it? Okay. So your higher self. And the one we're going to do last is 4. The 4th thing, and for now, the last thing, for spiritual integration to occur is honoring your body. This means honoring your body in the process from releasing emotions through the body to the right movement practices, the right food and nourishment, and even the rest patterns that work for you, like when you wake and when you sleep. And I'm going to say something else about this one. There's no one size fits all with this. It's not like everyone's meant to be a vegan or everyone's meant to be on keto or everybody's meant to be paleo. This is truly, 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 truly so individual. So honoring the individuality of what you need for food, honoring the individuality of what you need for rest, honoring the individuality of what you need for movement practices, and even honoring the individuality of how you express and release emotions through your body. We're going to be addressing most of these issues in the rest of this series, so stay tuned. Checking to see if there's feedback, comments, thoughts. If you want to work on this privately with me, if you really want to go on this depth journey and this depth process of doing this work, the best thing that you can do is to book a spiritual integration strategy session. This is a working session where we go on a sacred scavenger hunt for fragmented parts of your spirit, and we find out what's missing on the inside that you require for your next levels of leadership, legacy, and impact on the outside. This is not a free call. This is not a sales call. This is an actual working session. And I will put a link for that in the comments after this ends. So let's pivot and talk about what happens as you address these 5 core parts and what happens as you repair spiritual fractures and what happens as you spiritually integrate. Okay. Number 1, you retrieve soul parts that are lost from trauma and integrate them. Now, this is an interesting one because it shows up sometimes in some unexpected ways. Your leadership style and communication patterns improve, and you lead with more power, clarity, and ease. Two, you become more clear on what your spiritual gifts are and how to apply them for maximum impact on the collective. As a result, you create a larger impact in your own work, potentially one that lasts for generations, and a larger impact on your team. Three, you deepen your connection to both God and your higher self. And I'm putting these together here because, as I mentioned before, they are connected. While these are separate aspects, they are closely intertwined. You embody the highest levels of who you are, and others treat you differently and sink deeper into trust and safety around you. You also receive clarity on the larger picture and your spiritual lineage, as well as your human lineage, and the specific, very, 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 very specific legacy you are meant to leave for those who come after. And four, your physical health and emotional ease improve as you release emotional weight and emotional baggage. This shows up in decreased stress, more emotional bandwidth, and clearer decision making. And all of these pieces towards spiritual integration then flow into legacy level impact, then flow into making a difference for those who come after you. So if you'd like to move forwards on this journey, I have two invitations for you. The first is to book a spiritual integration strategy session. This is a working session where we go on a sacred scavenger hunt for fragmented parts of your spirit. We find out what is missing on the inside that you require for your next levels of leadership, legacy, and impact on the outside. We'll literally be going through the 5-part process that I mentioned above on this call, mapping out exactly what is going on with you and leaving you with a blueprint of next steps. To be clear, this is not a free call or sales call. It's a paid call where you and I get on it and get right into doing the work. And I'll put the link to that in the comments. The second invitation is to continue on this live stream journey with me. Week 2, we will be addressing leadership, impact, and trauma. Probably something along the lines of integrated leadership and leadership styles and unwinding collective trauma, although we'll get there. Week 3 will be about connection to God. And week 4 will be all about calling your higher self down into form for legacy level impact. And I'll put a sign up link for that in the comments as well. Okay, pausing again to see if there's any questions. Okay, loves, I am going to jump off for now. Feel free to put your questions below this live, put your comments below this live. Let me know what it inspired for you. Let me know what's on your mind, and see you again next week.